The wrench slipped from Mara's small fingers and clattered against the driveway concrete. "That car is junk." Bradford Kellier's voice cut across the quiet suburban afternoon like a blade through wet paper. He stood on the edge of Rourke Halden's property line, white polo gleaming under the golden hour sun, one manicured finger jabbing toward the open hood of the red Mustang. Rourke didn't look up. His hand stayed steady on the carburetor, knuckles smeared with grease, the staff sergeant chevron on his olive field jacket catching a slant of dying light. "You hear me, Halden?" Bradford stepped closer, his leather loafers crunching on the gravel strip between their driveways. The gold watch on his wrist flashed. "I said that thing is junk. You're wasting your weekends on a coffin with wheels." Mara pressed against her father's side, her denim pinafore brushing his faded jeans. She was 8 years old with dark wavy hair to her shoulders and eyes that held questions she didn't know how to ask. Her gaze lifted to Bradford, then back to her father's face, searching for something she could trust. 3 neighbors had stopped what they were doing. Mrs. Patterson paused mid-sweep on her porch. The Delgado twins looked up from their basketball game. Old Mr. Hendricks stood frozen at his mailbox, letters clutched in weathered hands. Bradford loved an audience. "Look at it." He swept his arm toward the Mustang like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Rust around the wheel wells. Engine that sounds like a dying animal. What is this, 1967? You think you're going to restore this thing? With what money? What do you think Rourke should do? Stay silent or put Bradford in his place?" If you're watching this for the first time, welcome to the channel. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. The Mustang sat in the driveway like a wounded soldier refusing to fall. Candy apple red paint that had once gleamed now showed patches of primer and bare metal. The chrome side vents still caught light, but the mirrors were clouded with age. Hood propped open, engine bay exposed to the world like an open wound waiting to be stitched. To anyone else, it was a relic. To Rourke, it was the last breath of something sacred. "I'm fixing it for her." Rourke's voice came out low, measured. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and rested his palm on Mara's shoulder. "One day, she'll drive it." Bradford's laugh exploded across the cul-de-sac. It was the kind of laugh designed to wound, pitched high enough to carry, sharp enough to embed itself in memory. "For her." He pointed at Mara now, and the girl flinched. "What she'll get is a ride to the junkyard. Do everyone a favor, Halden. Call a tow truck. Get that eyesore off the street before it tanks every property value on the block." The Delgado twins snickered. Mrs. Patterson looked away. Mr. Hendricks shuffled back inside his house and closed the door. Rourke's jaw tightened. A vein pulsed at his temple. His fingers curled, then slowly uncurled. 15 years of military service had taught him one thing above all else. Restraint was its own kind of power. He said nothing. Bradford waited for a reaction, for the explosion he was trying to provoke. When it didn't come, something flickered across his face. Annoyance. Maybe disappointment. "That's what I thought." Bradford adjusted his watch, a gesture meant to remind everyone of what he had and what Rourke didn't. "Kellier Realty sponsors the annual auto showcase, you know. Real cars, real engines, not whatever's dying under that hood." He turned to walk away, then stopped, looked over his shoulder with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Tell you what, I'll send you an invitation. Maybe you can push it there. Give everyone a good laugh." His loafers clicked across the pavement. The Polo disappeared into the house across the street. A door slammed. Silence settled over the driveway like dust after an explosion. Mara tugged at her father's jacket sleeve. Her voice came out small, almost a whisper. "Daddy? Why did he say those things about Atlas?" Rourke went still. His hand found the edge of the car, fingers pressing into the metal like he was trying to hold something together that wanted to break apart. She had named it. She had given voice to the thing he never spoke about. The name painted nowhere on the car, but carved so deep into its steel that removing it would mean destroying everything. Atlas. Because some people, Rourke said carefully, don't understand what things are worth. He knelt beside her, bringing his eyes level with hers. Her small hands were smudged with oil from passing him tools all afternoon. She looked so much like her mother, it made his chest ache. This car isn't junk, baby girl. It's a promise. And we're gonna keep it. Together. Mara nodded, though the doubt in her eyes hadn't fully left. The sun dipped below the roofline of the houses across the street. Shadows stretched long across the driveway, swallowing the Mustang inch by inch. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and went silent. Rourke stood and looked at the engine bay. Wires that needed replacing. Hoses cracked with age. A carburetor that hadn't breathed properly in years. He could fix it. He had to fix it. Because the Mustang wasn't just a car. It was the last thing he had left a friend who died with his paws on foreign ground, under stars that didn't know his name. But as Rourke reached for his toolbox, his knee buckled. The old injury from the blast that ended his service sent a spike of pain up his thigh. He caught himself on the fender, breathing through clenched teeth. Mara watched him with those wide, knowing eyes. "I'm okay," he said before she could ask. "Just tired." She didn't believe him. He could see it in the way she held his gaze a second too long. They worked in silence until the streetlights buzzed to life. Mara handed him a socket wrench, then a flathead screwdriver, then a rag to wipe his hands. She knew the rhythm without being taught. By the time they packed up the tools, the neighborhood had gone dark and quiet. But one light stayed on. Across the street, Bradford Kellier stood at his window, watching. His silhouette backlit by the glow of his living room, arms crossed, head tilted slightly to one side. The expression on his face was unreadable. And when Rourke looked up and caught his stare, Bradford didn't look away. He smiled. The kind of smile that said this wasn't over. The kind that promised something worse was coming. Rourke Halden woke at 3 in the morning with sand in his throat and fire in his memory. The dream was always the same. Desert heat shimmering off metal. The convoy rolling through a narrow pass. Atlas in the passenger seat, ears forward, nose working the air. And then the door. The wrong door. The one rigged with enough explosive to turn steel into shrapnel and men into ghosts. He sat up in the dark, chest heaving, sweat soaking through his gray t-shirt. The bedroom was silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan and the distant tick of the kitchen clock downstairs. Mara was asleep in a room next door. He could hear her breathing through the thin wall, soft and steady, the rhythm of a child who still believed her father could fix anything. He wished they were true. The dog tags hung from a hook beside his bed. He reached for them without thinking, felt the cool metal against his palm. 2 names stamped into the steel. His own, and one that belonged to a 90-pound Belgian Malinois who had saved 6 men by jumping onto a pressure plate before anyone else could take another step. Atlas hadn't hesitated. Rourke had watched him leap, watched the door blow inward, watched fur and bone and loyalty scatter across the sand. He survived because Atlas didn't. That was the math of war. Somebody always paid the bill, and the ones who lived had to keep living with the receipt. Rourke swung his legs over the side of the bed. His knee throbbed, the permanent souvenir from the blast that ended his service. Shrapnel too deep to remove. Nerve damage too complex to repair. He limped to the window and looked out at the driveway below. The Mustang sat in the moonlight, red paint turned black by shadow. Hood closed now, tarp half draped over the rear quarter panel. It looked like something waiting, something patient. He had found the car 3 weeks after discharge. Some Army surplus auction in a town nobody remembered. The Mustang had been sitting in the back lot, ignored, rusted, forgotten. The same convoy transport vehicle that had carried Atlas on their last mission. Same year, same model. Different life. Rourke had bought it with money he didn't have and trailered it home with faith he couldn't explain. Now it sat in his driveway, like a monument to everything he couldn't say out loud. He closed his eyes and let his forehead rest against the glass. "I'm trying, buddy," he whispered to no one. "I'm trying." Morning came gray and damp. Mara found him in the garage, sorting through boxes of parts, coffee going cold on the workbench. She stood in the doorway in her pajamas, hair tangled from sleep, watching him with those serious eyes. "You didn't sleep again," she said. It wasn't a question. "Slept enough." "Liar." He looked up. She was smiling a little, the way her mother used to smile when she caught him in a small untruth. It hurt and healed at the same time. "Come help me find the distributor cap," he said. "Should be in one of these boxes." They worked together through the morning. Mara knelt beside him on the concrete floor, small hands digging through plastic bins filled with gaskets, bolts, and electrical connectors. She didn't complain about the dust or the cold. She never did. "Daddy," she asked after a long silence. "Yeah, baby? Was Atlas a good dog?" Rourke's hands stopped moving. He stared at the spark plug in his palm, like he had never seen one before. "The best," he said finally. "The best there ever was." What happened to him? He had known this question would come, had practiced answers in his head for years. But none of them felt right. None of them captured the truth without shattering the peace in her eyes. "He saved people," Rourke said carefully. "That was his job, and he was better at it than anyone I ever knew. But sometimes, when you save people, you can't save yourself too." Mara considered this. Her fingers traced the edge of a gasket, following the rubber curve like a path on a map. "Is that why you want to fix the car?" "Because of him." "Yeah." His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Yeah, it is." She nodded slowly, accepting this the way children accept mysteries they don't fully understand. "Then we'll fix it," she said. "Together." He pulled her into a hug before she could see his eyes getting wet. The rest of the week passed in a blur of night shifts at the freight depot and stolen hours under the hood. Rourke loaded shipping containers from midnight to dawn, came home, showered, made breakfast for Mara, walked her to the bus stop, then worked on the Mustang until his body gave out. 3 hours of sleep. Sometimes 4. Never enough. But the car was starting to take shape. New brake lines. Rebuilt fuel pump. Fresh spark plugs donated by a boy from church who had earned the money mowing lawns. The widow down the street, Mrs. Delphine, had brought over a jar of coins and a plate of cornbread one afternoon, pressing both into his hands before he could refuse. "For the chrome," she said. "Every soldier deserves to shine." He tried to give it back. She was gone before he could. The neighborhood was changing around him. Not everyone followed Bradford's lead. Some people remembered that Rourke had shoveled their driveways in winter without being asked, that he had helped Mr. Hendricks carry groceries last summer when the old man's back went out, that he stood during the anthem at the Memorial Day parade even when his knee screamed loud enough to make him dizzy. Character left marks that money couldn't erase. But Bradford left marks too. Friday evening, Rourke found a notice taped to his garage door. Official letterhead from the Brookridge Homeowners Association. 7 words printed in bold across the top. Notice of violation. Unsightly vehicle. His stomach dropped. The letter demanded that the Mustang be moved to an enclosed garage or removed from the property within 7 days. Failure to comply would result in fines. Continued failure would result in legal action. Bradford Kellier's signature sat at the bottom. HOA board member. Rourke read it twice, then a third time. He folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Mara was waiting on the porch when he turned around. She had seen the letter. She had seen his face. "What does it say?" she asked. "Nothing important." She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. That night, after dinner, after homework, after he tucked her into bed and kissed her forehead, Rourke sat alone in the garage with the Mustang. The smell of oil and old leather wrapped around him like a blanket. He ran his hand along the dashboard, feeling the grain of the vinyl, the shape of the gauges, the grooves where Atlas used to rest his paws during long drives. "They want me to give up," he said quietly. "They want me to quit." The car didn't answer, but somehow that felt like an answer anyway. He picked up a wrench and got back to work. And somewhere in the darkness behind him, a black SUV rolled slowly down the street. Its headlights were off. Its driver watched the garage for a long moment. Then it disappeared around the corner without a sound. The second letter came on Monday. Rourke found it stuck to the windshield of the Mustang, tucked beneath the wiper blade like a parking ticket from hell. Same official letterhead. Same cold language. This time the fine was $200. He pulled the paper free and read it standing in the morning drizzle, rain spotting the ink until some of the words began to blur. Didn't matter. He already knew what it said. Noncompliance. Property standards. Visual blight. Visual blight. That's what they called it. Like the car was a disease spreading across the neighborhood. Like rust was contagious. Across the street, Bradford's Mercedes gleamed in his driveway, freshly waxed, catching raindrops like diamonds. The man himself stood on his porch with a steaming mug, watching Rourke with a half-smile that didn't try to hide anything. He raised the mug in a mock salute. Rourke crumpled the letter and walked back inside. By Wednesday, the neighborhood had picked sides. Mrs. Delphine still waved when she saw him. Mr. Hendricks nodded from his mailbox. The boy from church, Deshaun, rode his bike past the house every afternoon just to check on the Mustang's progress. But others had changed. Mrs. Patterson swept her porch now with her back turned, never making eye contact. The Delgado twins crossed the street to avoid passing his driveway. At the grocery store, conversation stopped when Rourke walked down the aisle. Bradford was working the neighborhood like a campaign, hosting backyard barbecues, sponsoring the Little League team, donating to the school fundraiser. Every act of generosity came with a whispered comment about property values, about standards, about that veteran who couldn't let go of a car that should have been crushed years ago. Poison moved slowly, but it moved. Thursday afternoon, Rourke was tightening bolts under the hood when Mara came running from the backyard, her face flushed and her eyes wet. What happened? He was on his feet before she reached him. Tommy Delgado. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. He said, "You're crazy." He said, "The car is garbage, and you're garbage, and we should move away." Rourke felt something cold settle in his chest. He knelt down, bringing his eyes level with hers. "Did he hurt you?" "No." She shook her head. But he laughed. They all laughed. The other kids, too. He pulled her close. She was shaking, small tremors running through her shoulders like aftershocks from an earthquake she didn't cause. "Listen to me," he said into her hair. "What they say doesn't change what's true. This car matters. You matter. And nobody gets to tell us different. Nobody." She nodded against his chest, but he could feel the doubt. 8 years old and already learning that words could cut deeper than any blade. That night, after she was asleep, Rourke sat on the back porch and stared at the sky. Stars scattered across the dark like bullet holes in black canvas. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle moaned. His knee ached. It always ached worse when the weather changed. He rubbed the scarred skin through his jeans, feeling the ridges where the shrapnel had entered. Atlas had taken the worst of it. The door, the pressure plate, the blast. All of it. Every piece of metal that should have been in Rourke's body had landed in his partner instead. Sometimes survival felt like theft. The Mustang sat in the driveway, silent and waiting. He had made progress this week. New wiring harness. Rebuilt ignition. The engine had almost turned over yesterday. Almost. But almost wasn't enough. Not with Bradford circling like a shark smelling blood. Friday brought the worst blow yet. Rourke was walking Mara to the bus stop when he saw the crowd gathered outside his house. Neighbors. Half a dozen at least. Standing in a loose semicircle near his property line, arms crossed, faces set. Bradford stood at the front, clipboard in hand. "There he is," Bradford announced as Rourke approached. "The man of the hour." Mara's hand tightened in her father's grip. "What's going on?" Rourke kept his voice even. "Community meeting." Bradford flipped a page on his clipboard. "We've had some complaints, Halden, about the noise, the smell, the general eyesore situation you've got going on." "What complaints? From who?" Bradford smiled. "Concerned citizens. People who care about this neighborhood. People who invested in their homes and don't appreciate watching the value drop every time someone drives past your personal junkyard." A few of the neighbors nodded. Others looked away. "I have 7 days," Rourke said. "That's what the notice said. That was Monday. You're down to 4 now. And from what I can see, that car isn't any closer to being garage ready." Bradford stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Rourke could hear. "Face it, you're out of your depth, out of money, out of time. Do the smart thing. Call a scrapper. Walk away with dignity." Rourke's hands curled into fists at his sides. His jaw locked so tight he could feel his teeth grinding. Mara tugged at his sleeve. Her voice was small but steady. "Don't let him take Atlas again, Daddy." Something broke open inside him. Something old and deep and forged in fire. He looked at Bradford, at the pressed polo and the perfect teeth and the gold watch catching morning light. At everything this man represented. Comfort purchased on the backs of others. Confidence borrowed from bank accounts. Worth measured in square footage and brand names. And Rourke made a decision. "For days," he said quietly. "Fine. For days." He turned and walked Mara to the bus stop without another word. She climbed aboard, waved through the window, and disappeared down the street. When Rourke turned back toward his house, the crowd had dispersed. Bradford remained, standing alone in his driveway, watching. Always watching. That afternoon, Rourke sold his service medals. It felt like cutting off a limb. The Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, the commendation ribbons he had earned in places with names he still couldn't pronounce. He took them to a pawn shop on the other side of town, spread them on the counter, and walked out with $400 in his pocket. Enough for a rebuilt carburetor. Enough for new gaskets. Enough to keep going. The man behind the counter had called after him. "You sure about this, brother? These don't come back." Rourke hadn't answered. Hadn't looked back. Some things mattered more than memory. Saturday night. He worked until 2 in the morning. The engine bay was almost complete now. Wires connected. Fluids filled. Everything in place. He turned the key. The engine coughed. Sputtered. Caught for one glorious second. Then died. Rourke leaned against the fender, breathing hard, hands trembling. So close. So impossibly close. He was about to try again when he noticed something on the ground near the rear tire. A folded piece of paper, placed carefully where he would find it. He picked it up and opened it. For words, handwritten in neat block letters. Try adjusting the timing. No signature. No name. He looked up and down the street. Empty. Dark. Not a soul in sight. But someone had been here. Someone who knew engines. Someone who had watched him fail and left behind the exact advice he needed. Who? And why? The question spun through his head as he walked back to the Mustang, paper clutched in his hand. He didn't have answers, but for the first time in weeks, he had something better. He had hope. Rourke adjusted the timing. Sunday morning, 5 a.m., garage door opened to let the pre-dawn air cool his face. His fingers moved with precision, rotating the distributor cap by millimeters, chasing the perfect alignment between spark and compression. He turned the key. The engine coughed. Caught. Held. A rough idle, unsteady as a newborn colt, but alive. Actually alive. Rourke sat behind the wheel and listened to the sound fill the garage. It was the most beautiful noise he had heard in years. Ragged, imperfect, but real. He killed the engine before the neighbors could wake and complain. But the smile on his face stayed until the sun came up. The mysterious note sat on his workbench, creased from being folded and unfolded a dozen times. Someone had left it. Someone who knew what they were talking about. Someone who cared enough to help without asking for credit. The question was who? Mara noticed the change in him at breakfast. She watched him over her cereal, eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You're smiling," she said. "Am I not allowed?" "You never smile before coffee." He laughed. Actually laughed. It surprised both of them. "Good things happened last night," he said. "Progress. Atlas. Atlas." She grinned, milk dripping from her spoon. "I knew it. I knew you could do it." Her faith hit him harder than any of Bradford's insults. She believed in him. Without evidence. Without guarantees. Just believed. He would not let her down. The week that followed brought small miracles disguised as ordinary kindness. Monday afternoon, Mrs. Delphine appeared at the garage with a casserole dish and an envelope. The dish was full of baked chicken and rice. The envelope held $87 in crumpled bills and loose change. "Don't argue with me," she said before he could speak. "My late husband was Army. 32 years. He would have wanted you to have it." She was gone before Rourke could find words. Tuesday, Deshawn rode up on his bike with a cardboard box strapped to the back. Inside were a fuel filter, 2 spark plugs, and a length of vacuum hose. All brand new. "Got them from the auto parts store," the boy said. "Mr. Jenkins let me work sweeping the parking lot. Said these were the ones you needed." Rourke looked at the parts, then at Deshawn. 14 years old, gap-toothed smile, basketball jersey 3 sizes too big. "How did you know what I needed?" Deshawn shrugged. "Asked around. People talk." He pedaled away before Rourke could thank him properly. Wednesday brought Mr. Hendricks, shuffling down the driveway with a paper bag clutched in his arthritic hands. Inside was a set of chrome trim pieces, polished to mirror shine. "Found these in my shed," the old man said. "Been sitting there 20 years. No use to me anymore." "Sir, I can't." "You can. You will." Mr. Hendricks fixed him with a stare that allowed no argument. Some of us remember what matters. Some of us remember who shoveled our walks when our backs gave out. Take the parts, son. Make that car sing. The neighborhood was dividing. Bradford had his followers, the ones who measured worth in property values and status symbols. But another current was flowing beneath the surface. Quieter, stronger, the kind of support that didn't announce itself at community meetings. Thursday evening, Rourke worked late into the night. The engine ran smoother now, the timing dialed in, the carburetor breathing clean. He had replaced the brake lines, bled the system, tested the steering. The Mustang was coming back to life piece by piece. He was adjusting the headlights when he felt someone watching him. The sensation was subtle at first, a prickle at the back of his neck. The awareness that eyes were on him from somewhere in the darkness beyond the garage light. He straightened slowly and looked toward the street. A figure stood on the sidewalk. Older man, gray hair, work jacket, hands in pockets. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Rourke wiped his hands on a rag and stepped toward the driveway's edge. "Can I help you?" No response. The man remained still, face shadowed, impossible to read. "Hey, I asked you a question." The figure turned and walked away. Slow, deliberate steps. No hurry, no explanation. Rourke watched until he disappeared around the corner. Something about the way the man moved seemed familiar. Military bearing, controlled gait, the kind of posture that came from years of discipline. He went back to work, but the unease stayed with him. Friday, another note appeared. This time it was tucked under the Mustang's windshield wiper. Same neat block letters, same absence of signature. Check the voltage regulator. Original is shot. Rourke tested the regulator. Fried, just like the note said. He replaced it with a part from a box Deshawn had brought. The charging system stabilized immediately. Someone was helping him. Someone who knew exactly what was wrong and exactly how to fix it. But they never showed their face. Never asked for thanks. Why? The question gnawed at him through the weekend. He worked. Mara handed him tools. The Mustang grew stronger, but the shadow lingered. Sunday afternoon, Bradford made his move. Rourke was in the garage when the black sedan pulled up. Official plates. County seal on the door. A woman in a gray suit stepped out, clipboard in hand, face set in professional neutrality. "Mr. Halden, that's me. I'm Ms. Patterson from Child Protective Services. We've received a complaint." The world tilted. Rourke's hands went cold. A complaint about what? Concerns about your daughter's living environment. Specifically, the presence of hazardous materials and unsafe conditions on your property. He stopped himself. Took a breath. "That's not true. I'm not here to argue, Mr. Halden. I'm here to assess." She looked past him into the garage, at the oil cans and toolboxes and engine parts spread across the floor. "May I come in?" He had no choice. He stepped aside. For 30 minutes, she walked through his house. Checked the kitchen, the bathroom, Mara's bedroom, the garage. She wrote notes on her clipboard without comment, face betraying nothing. Mara sat on the couch through the whole thing, eyes wide, hands folded in her lap. She didn't understand what was happening. Neither did Rourke. Not fully, but he knew who had made the call. When Ms. Patterson finally left, she offered a thin smile. "I didn't find anything concerning today, Mr. Halden, but I'd recommend cleaning up the garage. Chemicals should be stored properly. Tools should be organized. This won't be my last visit." The sedan pulled away. Rourke stood in the driveway, fists clenched, rage building in his chest like pressure in a boiler. Across the street, Bradford stood at his window, watching, always watching. And when their eyes met through the glass, Bradford smiled. The kind of smile that said this was just the beginning. The police cruiser arrived on Tuesday morning. Rourke was walking Mara to the bus stop when the car rolled up, lights off, but presence impossible to ignore. 2 officers stepped out, young faces, pressed uniforms, the kind of careful expressions that came with training. "Mr. Halden," the taller one checked a notepad. "We need to ask you some questions." Mara's hand tightened in his grip. He could feel her trembling. "About what?" "We've received a complaint about potential fire hazards on your property. Gasoline storage, improper wiring. We need to take a look." The bus rounded the corner. Rourke knelt down, hands on Mara's shoulders. "Get on the bus, baby. Go to school. Everything's fine. But Daddy, everything's fine. He kissed her forehead. I promise. She climbed aboard, looking back through the window until the bus disappeared. Her face haunted him. The officers spent an hour in his garage. They photographed everything. The fuel cans, the wiring harness hanging from a hook, the battery charger plugged into the wall. Every piece of evidence Bradford needed to prove his point. Technically, the shorter officer said, closing his notepad, there's no violation here. Your storage is within code. But I'd recommend keeping things cleaner. Avoiding complaints. Avoiding complaints from who? The officers exchanged a look. They knew. Everyone knew. Have a good day, Mr. Halden. They drove away. Rourke stood alone in his driveway, the morning sun harsh against his face. That afternoon, the HOA fines arrived. $300 for visual blight, $200 for noise complaints, $150 for failure to maintain landscaping standards. The total climbed past $600 before he reached the final page. He didn't have it, not even close. The night shifts at the depot paid minimum wage. After rent, utilities, Mara's school supplies, groceries, there was nothing left. He had already sold his metals, already borrowed against future paychecks. The walls were closing in. Wednesday night, Rourke sat at the kitchen table with bills spread before him like a losing hand of cards. Numbers that didn't add up, deadlines that couldn't be met. A daughter sleeping upstairs who trusted him to hold the world together. He thought about quitting. For the first time since he started, actually thought about calling a scrapper and watching the Mustang get towed away. But then he remembered Atlas, the way the dog had looked at him in those final seconds. The moment before the blast. No fear, no hesitation, just duty, pure and absolute. Atlas had given everything. Rourke couldn't give up. He picked up the phone and called the only person he knew who might help. Sergeant Major Davis had served with Rourke's unit overseas. Retired now, living 3 states away, but still connected to the network of veterans who looked out for their own. Halden, the voice on the other end was gruff but warm. Been a while. Too long, sir. What do you need? Rourke explained. The car, the neighbor, the fines, the CPS visit, all of it. When he finished, there was a long silence on the line. This Bradford character, Davis said finally. He's got resources, connections. People like that don't fight fair. I know. You're going to need more than determination to beat him. I know that too. Another pause. Then, there's a man. Lives in your area. Retired engineer. Did work for defense contractors before he got out. Owes me a favor from way back. Name's Vernon Price. What kind of engineer? The kind that builds things nobody else can. Engines. Systems. Stuff that's classified above your clearance level. Davis chuckled. He's also stubborn as hell and doesn't like being bothered. But if you can get him interested, he might help. How do I find him? You don't. He finds you. If he thinks you're worth his time, he'll show up. If not, Davis let the silence fill in a rest. The call ended. Rourke sat in the dark kitchen, thinking about mysteries and strangers and the notes that kept appearing on his car. Was Vernon Price the one watching him? The one leaving advice in neat block letters? He had no way to know, but the possibility kindled something he hadn't felt in weeks. Thursday brought more pressure. A letter from the bank about his mortgage. 60 days behind. Payment due immediately or foreclosure proceedings would begin. A call from Mara's school. She had gotten into a fight at recess. Another child had called her father crazy. Called the Mustang trash. She had punched the kid in the nose. Rourke picked her up from the principal's office, her small face defiant, knuckles scraped from the impact. She didn't apologize. He didn't ask her to. Sometimes, he said on the drive home, people push until you push back. Is that wrong? No. But you have to be careful. Pushing back can cost you things. She looked out the window. Like what? Like peace. Like opportunities. Like the chance to prove them wrong a better way. She considered this. What's the better way? Success. Living well. Showing them what you're made of without throwing a single punch. Mara nodded slowly. Is that what you're doing? With the car. Trying to. She reached over and took his hand. Her fingers were small and warm. I believe in you, Daddy. 4 words. The most powerful 4 words in any language. Friday, Rourke worked until midnight. The Mustang was almost ready. Engine rebuilt. Transmission solid. Brakes responsive. The body still showed wear, but the bones were strong. He was polishing the chrome when headlights swept across the garage. A truck pulled up to the curb. Old Chevy. Primer gray. Engine rumbling like distant thunder. A man stepped out. Late 60s. Silver hair. Work jacket over flannel. The same figure Rourke had seen watching him days before. This time, he didn't walk away. Halden. The man's voice was sandpaper and gravel. Name's Vernon Price. Heard you've got something worth looking at. Rourke straightened, grease rag in hand. Who told you that? People talk. I listen. Vernon walked toward the garage, eyes scanning the Mustang with professional interest. 67 fastback. Numbers matching. Yes, sir. Engine work. Rebuilt it myself. From the ground up. Vernon circled the car slowly, running his hand along the fender, peering into the engine bay. His expression gave nothing away. You served, he said. Statement, not question. 12 years. Infantry. Davis called me. Said you saved lives over there. Rourke didn't respond. Some things didn't need confirmation. Vernon straightened and met his eyes. This car matters to you. I can see that. But you're in over your head, and time's running out. That Bradford character isn't going to stop until you're broken or gone. I know. So what are you going to do about it? Finish what I started. Show him he's wrong about me. About this car. About everything. Vernon studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile crept across his weathered face. There's a car show coming up. Annual gala. Kellier sponsors it every year. Brings out his fancy imports and makes everyone feel small. I know about it. Good. Then you know that's your battlefield. Vernon reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. Invitation. Bradford sent them to half the neighborhood. Meant as an insult. But an insult is just an opportunity wearing ugly clothes. Rourke took the paper. Read the date. 3 weeks away. You think the car can be ready? Vernon's smile widened. I think we're about to find out. Because starting tomorrow, you've got help. Real help. The grinder screamed against steel at 6 in the morning. Sparks flew in orange cascades, showering the garage floor like fallen stars. Rourke leaned into the work, safety goggles fogged with sweat, arms burning from the vibration. Beside him, Vernon Price marked measurements on a sheet of aluminum, pencil moving with the precision of a surgeon. 3 weeks to the gala. 21 days to transform a wounded machine into something magnificent. They worked in shifts. Rourke took nights at the depot, came home at dawn, slept 2 hours, then joined Vernon in the garage until exhaustion made his hands shake. Vernon arrived each morning with coffee and parts, speaking little, teaching through demonstration. The old engineer was a master. His hands moved over the engine like a pianist over keys, finding problems by touch, solving them with tools Rourke had never seen before. This carburetor is garbage, Vernon announced on day 3, holding up the rebuilt unit Rourke had installed. Factory spec won't cut it. We need something custom. I don't have money for custom. Vernon reached into his truck bed and pulled out a chrome assembly that gleamed like polished silver. For barrels. Racing heritage. Worth more than Rourke's monthly rent. Where did you get that? Built it. 30 years ago. Been waiting for the right project. Vernon handed it over. This is the right project. The days blurred together. Mornings of grinding, welding, tuning. Afternoons of bleeding brakes, adjusting suspension, chasing electrical gremlins through aging wire harnesses. Evenings with Mara, who sat on an overturned bucket and asked questions about every part, every process, every reason why. She learned fast. By the second week, she could identify tools by name. By the third, she was handing Vernon the right wrench before he asked for it. Girl's got good instincts, Vernon said one night, watching her organize the sockets set by size. Reminds me of my daughter, before she grew up and got too smart for her old man. Rourke smiled. Mara's already too smart for me. Then you're raising her right. The neighborhood watched from a distance. Mrs. Delphine brought lunch on Saturdays. Mr. Hendricks stopped by to offer encouragement and old stories about muscle cars he had owned in his youth. Deshawn appeared after school each day, eager to help, learning alongside Mara. but others watched with different intentions. Bradford drove past the house twice daily, morning and evening, his Mercedes slowing as it approached, tinted windows hiding whatever expression lived on his face. He never stopped, never spoke, just observed. The HOA letters kept coming. New fines every few days. Noise complaints. Parking violations. Claims that the restoration work violated neighborhood covenants. Rourke paid what he could, ignored what he couldn't. He's trying to bleed you dry, Vernon said, reading the latest notice. Death by 1,000 cuts. I know. You can't win a war of attrition against someone with deeper pockets. I know that too. Vernon crumpled the paper and tossed it in the trash. Then we better make sure the gala changes everything. One shot, one moment. Make it count. The Mustang transformed before their eyes. The engine bay, once a mess of corroded parts and frayed wires, became a showcase of precision engineering. Chrome gleamed against black paint. Headers wrapped in heat-resistant tape curved like sculpture. The carburetor Vernon had built sat at the center like a crown jewel. The body required more work. Rust spots needed cutting and patching. Primer gave way to fresh coats of candy apple red, sprayed in Mrs. Delphine's garage where the ventilation was better. The chrome trim Mr. Hendricks had donated went back on piece by piece, each fitting requiring patience and adjustment. Day 15. The engine fired on the first turn of the key. Not a rough idle. Not a cough and sputter. A clean, deep rumble that vibrated through the concrete floor and rattled the tools hanging on the wall. 8 cylinders singing in harmony. Power waiting to be unleashed. Rourke sat behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering column, tears streaming down his face. There you are, buddy, he whispered. There you are. Mara climbed into the passenger seat, her small frame swallowed by the bench. She reached over and put her hand on his arm. Atlas is back, Daddy. He couldn't speak, could only nod. Vernon stood at the open hood, arms crossed, a rare smile on his weathered face. She runs. But running isn't enough. She needs to shine. She needs to perform. 6 days left. We've got work to do. 6 days. 144 hours. They pushed harder. Rourke stopped sleeping. Vernon brought reinforcements. 2 other veterans from his network. Men with grease under their fingernails and service in their eyes. They worked through the nights, trading shifts, sharing tools, united by a cause none of them fully explained, but all of them understood. Day 19. The Mustang rolled out of the garage under its own power. Rourke drove it around the block at sunset, Mara in the passenger seat, windows down, wind catching their hair. The engine sang. The suspension held. The brakes responded with confidence. It was real. After all the doubt and struggle and sacrifice, it was actually real. Neighbors stepped onto their porches to watch. Some waved. Others stared in disbelief. Bradford stood in his driveway, phone pressed to his ear, face twisted with something that might have been rage. Rourke didn't wave, didn't acknowledge him. He just drove. Day 20. Final preparations. Vernon inspected every inch of the car while Rourke polished chrome until his reflection stared back perfectly clear. The paint gleamed under the garage lights. The interior had been cleaned and restored, original vinyl preserved, dashboard gauges refurbished. It's ready, Vernon said finally. As ready as it's going to be. Thank you. Rourke extended his hand. For everything. Vernon shook it, grip firm. Don't thank me yet. Tomorrow's the test. Everything we've done leads to that moment. They closed the garage at midnight. Rourke covered the Mustang with a fresh tarp, hiding her from view until morning. He walked Mara to bed, kissed her forehead, told her tomorrow would change everything. I know, Daddy, she said, eyes already closing. Alice is going to show them. He stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe. Tomorrow. Everything rides on tomorrow. He went to sleep with hope in his chest for the first time in months. And 2 hours later, a shadow moved through his backyard. The fuel line had been cut. Rourke discovered it at 5 in the morning, stomach dropping as he watched gasoline drip onto the concrete floor of his garage. A clean slice. Deliberate. Made by someone who knew exactly where to strike. He fell to his knees beside the Mustang, flashlight trembling in his hand. The damage went deeper than the fuel line. Wires severed behind the dashboard. Brake fluid reservoir cracked. Ignition coil yanked from its mounting. Hours of sabotage. Professional work done by someone who understood cars and wanted this one to fail. Everything they had built, everything they had sacrificed, destroyed in a single night. Rourke's hand shook. His chest tightened. The flashlight clattered to the ground as he braced himself against the fender, struggling to breathe. The gala was in 12 hours. 12 hours. And the Mustang was dead. He thought about calling Vernon. Thought about waking Mara. Thought about 100 different ways to fight back against what had been done. But in that moment, alone in the gray, pre-dawn light, something inside him cracked. He sank to the garage floor, back against the wheel well, and cried. Not quiet tears. Not dignified grief. Deep, racking sobs that shook his entire body. The kind of crying he hadn't allowed himself since the day Atlas died. He cried for the dog who saved him. For the wife who left him when the nightmares became too much. For the brothers buried in foreign soil. For every promise he had made, and every one he had failed to keep. And he cried for Mara, his baby girl, who believed in him with everything she had, who would wake in a few hours expecting a miracle, who would find only wreckage. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the silent car. "I'm so sorry. I tried so hard." The garage offered no response, just the drip of leaking fluid and the distant hum of a waking neighborhood. Time passed. Minutes or hours, he couldn't tell. The light changed from gray to gold as the sun rose outside. Birds sang. Sprinklers hissed. The world moved forward while Rourke remained frozen. He thought about quitting. Thought about calling a tow truck and watching them drag the Mustang away. Thought about packing up Mara's things and leaving Brookridge forever. Starting over somewhere Bradford Kellier had never heard of. He thought about surrender. And then he remembered Atlas. The way the dog had moved toward that door without hesitation. No fear. No doubt. Just forward motion into certain danger because others needed saving. Atlas never quit. Not when the mission was hard. Not when the odds were impossible. Not until his last breath left his body on sand 10,000 miles from home. Rourke pulled himself to his feet. His eyes were swollen. His body ached. His heart felt like something heavy and broken trying to beat inside a cage. But he was standing. He looked at the damaged car, at the cut lines and severed wires, at the deliberate destruction meant to break his spirit. "Okay," he said out loud. "Okay." He walked to his workbench and picked up a wrench. "If you want to stop me," he said to no one, to everyone, to the shadow that had invaded his home, "you're going to have to do better than this." He started working. Vernon arrived at 7, coffee in hand, whistling some old tune. The whistling stopped when he saw the damage. "Dear God," he breathed. Rourke didn't look up. His hands moved with desperate precision, splicing wires, patching lines. "Help me. Halden, there's no way we can. Help me." Something in his voice must have carried weight. Vernon set down his coffee, grabbed a toolbox, and knelt beside him. They worked in silence for 2 hours. The sun climbed higher. The neighborhood woke. Somewhere, church bells rang, calling the faithful to prayer. At 9, Mara appeared in the doorway. Her face told the story. She had seen the damage, understood what it meant. "Daddy, not now, baby. I'm working. But not now." She retreated into the house. He hated himself for the harshness in his voice. But he couldn't stop, couldn't explain, could only fight. By noon, the fuel line was patched. The brake fluid reservoir replaced with a spare Vernon had in his truck. The ignition coil reconnected. But the wiring behind the dashboard remained a disaster. Dozens of connections severed or crossed. A puzzle that would take days to solve properly. They didn't have days. They had hours. Vernon sat back, wiping sweat from his brow. "I don't know, Halden. This is beyond emergency repair. We need to trace every wire, test every connection. Even if we work straight through, we might not. Try. I'm telling you, it might not be possible." Rourke looked at him. Really looked. "My daughter is in that house waiting for me to do something impossible. My dog died doing something impossible. Every good thing I've ever had came from refusing to accept what people told me was possible." He picked up his tools. "So we try." Vernon held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. They worked through the afternoon. Mara brought them sandwiches they didn't eat, water they barely touched. The garage became a furnace as the sun baked the roof. Sweat dripped onto tools and pooled on the concrete. At 4 o'clock, with the gala starting at 7, they connected the final wire. Rourke climbed behind the wheel. His hands were raw, his vision blurred from exhaustion. He turned the key. Nothing. The engine remained silent, dead, unmoved by all their efforts. Vernon shook his head slowly. The relay. Has to be the relay. But we don't have another one. Can't get one in time. Rourke slumped forward, forehead pressing against the steering wheel. This was it. The end. He had given everything and come up short. The gala would happen without him. Bradford would win. The Mustang would be towed away. Mara would learn that sometimes dreams die no matter how hard you fight for them. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness he heard Atlas. Not a real sound, just a memory. The soft whimper the dog made when he was ready to work. The exhale of anticipation before mission began. "I know, buddy," Rourke whispered. "I know." He opened his eyes. On the hood of the Mustang, a piece of paper fluttered in the breeze coming through the open garage door. He hadn't seen anyone leave it, hadn't heard footsteps or voices. But there it was. He walked to the front of the car and picked up the note. 4 words. Same neat block letters as before. Check the relay beneath. He dropped to his knees and slid under the car. There, tucked behind a frame near the firewall, was a relay he had never noticed. A secondary backup, original to the car, but hidden from standard view. And beside it, taped to the metal, was a brand new replacement. Still in packaging. Someone had been here. Someone had seen the sabotage and provided exactly what he needed. Rourke installed the relay with shaking hands. Climbed back behind the wheel. Turned the key. The engine roared to life. Mara appeared in the garage doorway, face lit with wonder. Vernon laughed out loud, a sound of pure relief. And Rourke sat in the driver's seat of his resurrected Mustang, tears streaming down his face, listening to the heartbeat of a friend he had never stopped loving. Let's go show them what Atlas can do. The Mustang rolled down Maple Street at 6:45, engine growling low and steady. Rourke's hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, jaw set. Beside him, Mara sat with her window down, dark hair whipping in the evening breeze. She wore her best dress, the blue one her grandmother had bought her 2 Christmases ago. Her feet didn't reach the floor. Behind them, Vernon followed in his Chevy, running escort like a guardian angel in primer gray. The neighborhood watched them pass. Faces in windows, bodies on porches, phones raised to capture the moment. The car that everyone said was junk, rolling under its own power toward the most prestigious event in Brookridge. Rourke kept his eyes forward. He didn't need their validation, only their witness. The Kellier Auto Gala took place in the parking lot of the community center, transformed for one night into a showcase of wealth and machinery. White tents with string lights, champagne tables with silver trays, a red carpet entrance for vehicles, complete with announcer and judging panel. Bradford had spared no expense. The lot was already packed when Rourke arrived. Lamborghinis and Ferraris gleamed under halogen lights. A vintage Porsche 911 sat near the entrance, its owner hovering protectively. German engineering competed with Italian design, competed with British craftsmanship. Not a single American muscle car in sight. Until now, Rourke pulled up to the entrance. The attendant, a young woman with a clipboard and an uncertain expression, looked at the Mustang like she wasn't sure it belonged. Name, Rourke Halden. She checked her list. Frowned. Checked again. I have you registered, but... She glanced at the car. Sir, this vehicle, is it street legal, insured, and invited? Rourke pulled the crumpled invitation from his pocket. Bradford's signature at the bottom. Check the list again. She did. Her frown deepened, but she waved him through. The Mustang rolled onto the red carpet. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. 100 pairs of eyes tracked the candy apple red fastback as it moved past vehicles worth 10 times its value. Rourke parked in the spot assigned to him, dead center of the display area. He suspected Bradford had placed him there intentionally, surrounded by exotic imports that would make the Mustang look like a relic. He killed the engine and stepped out. The crowd pressed closer, curious, skeptical, some impressed despite themselves. Mara climbed out of the passenger side, chin lifted, small hand finding her father's. "Stay close," he said quietly. "This is going to get interesting." Vernon appeared at his shoulder. "They're watching him." Northwest corner. Rourke looked. Bradford stood near the champagne table, surrounded by his usual entourage. White dinner jacket, gold cufflinks. The confident posture of a man who owned everything he could see. But his expression had changed. The smug certainty was gone, replaced by something tighter. Something that looked almost like fear. The Mustang was here. Against all odds. Against all attacks. And that was a problem. The first hour passed in a blur of handshakes and questions. Car enthusiasts approached with genuine curiosity. "Where did you find her? How long did restoration take? Who built that carburetor?" Rourke answered honestly. Gave credit to Vernon. Talked about the depot job and the night shifts and the community members who had donated parts and prayers. The story spread through the crowd like wildfire. By the second hour, everyone knew about the veteran and his daughter. About the neighbor who had tried to stop them. About the sabotage the night before. Bradford's name was whispered in tones of disapproval. At 9 o'clock, the judges began their rounds. 3 men in blazers with clipboards, examining each vehicle with professional detachment. They spent long minutes with the European imports, making notes, taking photographs. When they reached the Mustang, they stopped. The head judge, a silver-haired man named Wellington, circled the car 3 times without speaking. He opened the hood, studied the engine bay, ran his finger along the chrome headers, checked the welds on the firewall. "Who built this carburetor?" he asked finally. Vernon stepped forward. "I did." Wellington's eyes narrowed. "You're Vernon Price. From the defense contracts. Retired. Your work is legend in certain circles." Wellington looked at the engine again. "This is aerospace-grade machining on a street car. Custom fuel delivery. Precision timing. This isn't restoration. This is reinvention." The crowd pressed closer, listening. Wellington turned to Rourke. "Where did you serve, son?" "Iraq. Afghanistan. 12 years infantry. And this car?" "She was military transport. Last vehicle my K-9 partner rode in before he was killed in action." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone gasped. A phone camera flashed. Wellington nodded slowly. "I see." He made a note on his clipboard and moved on. But his expression said more than any score could. Bradford appeared 30 minutes later. He pushed through the crowd with forced casualness, champagne glass in hand, smile stretched tight across his face. "Holden." He stopped a few feet away, close enough to be heard, but far enough to maintain deniability. "I'm surprised you made it." "I'm not. That car has had quite a journey." Bradford's eyes flicked to the Mustang. "Surprised it's still running after all the problems you've had." Rourke met his gaze without flinching. Problems have a way of solving themselves when the right people step up. The comment landed. Bradford's smile flickered. "Well." He raised his glass in a mock toast. "May the best car win." He walked away before Rourke could respond. The judges announced results at 10. Third place went to a restored Jaguar E-Type. Second place to a limited edition Porsche. The crowd applauded politely. Wellington stepped to the microphone for the final announcement. "First place," he said, "was a difficult decision. We had exceptional vehicles tonight. World-class engineering. Historic significance." He paused, letting the tension build. But one car stood apart. Not because of its value or its pedigree, but because of what it represents. The determination of its owner. The skill of its builders. And the memory of a hero who never came home. Wellington turned toward Rourke. "First place goes to the 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback. Owner, Rourke Holden. Dedicated to Atlas." The crowd exploded. Applause. Cheers. Cameras flashing from every direction. Mara threw her arms around her father's neck, laughing and crying at the same time. Vernon stood back, arms crossed, smiling that rare smile. And across the lot, Bradford Kellier watched it all crumble. His empire of insults, his campaign of harassment, his certainty that money could crush what he couldn't control. All of it worthless in the face of one man who refused to quit. Rourke walked to the judging table to accept his trophy. A simple thing, crystal and brass. worth nothing compared to what it represented. He held it up for the crowd to see, and in that moment, surrounded by cheers and flashing lights, he could have sworn he heard a bark in the wind. Pop the hood. Bradford's voice cut through the applause like a knife through paper. He stood at the edge of the crowd, champagne glass abandoned, finger pointing at the Mustang. Pop the hood. Let's see what's really under there. The celebration paused. Heads turned. The air changed. Rourke stood near the trophy table, crystal award in hand, Mara pressed against his side. He looked at Bradford across 20 feet of asphalt and saw something desperate in the man's eyes. What are you talking about? Wellington asked, stepping forward. That engine. Bradford pushed through the crowd, closing the distance. That's not a stock rebuild. That's military hardware. Stolen technology. I want to know where it came from. A murmur rippled through the gathering. Phones appeared. Cameras focused. Rourke set down the trophy. You want to see under the hood? His voice carried across the lot. Fine. He walked to the Mustang. Slow. Deliberate. Every step watched by 100 pairs of eyes. His fingers found the hood release. The latch clicked. The hood rose on polished hinges. And everyone went silent. The engine bay had transformed since the morning's emergency repairs. In the rush of preparation, Rourke hadn't looked closely at what Vernon had done. But now, under the gala's halogen lights, the truth revealed itself. This was no standard rebuild. Custom headers curved like sculpture. Aerospace-grade aluminum housings replaced factory steel. The carburetor Vernon had built gleamed with precision machining found only in laboratories and defense facilities. Wellington leaned closer, eyes widening. Good Lord, that's classified technology, Bradford announced, voice rising with triumph. Military prototype. Stolen property. I knew it. I knew there was no way that junk car could. It's not stolen. A new voice. Strong. Clear. Cutting through Bradford's accusations like a blade. The crowd parted. A man walked forward. Late 60s. Gray hair, cropped short. Military bearing evident in every step. He wore a simple suit. No flashy accessories. Nothing to announce wealth or status. But Rourke recognized him immediately. The man from the shadows. The one who had watched from the sidewalk. The one who had left notes and parts when they were needed most. Vernon stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce Colonel Marcus Webb, retired, formerly head of Advanced Propulsion Systems for the Department of Defense. Colonel Webb stopped beside the Mustang. His eyes swept the crowd, settling finally on Bradford. This engine, Webb said, his voice carrying the authority of decades in uniform, was developed under a program I supervised. $2.3 billion in research and development. Prototype technology for next-generation military vehicles. Bradford's face went pale. Then it is stolen. No. Webb turned to face the crowd fully. It's mine. I designed it. When I retired, certain prototype components were decommissioned and returned to their original designers. Legal. Documented. Above board. He pulled a folder from inside his jacket. Handed it to Wellington. Titled Transfer. Licensing agreements. Everything signed and certified. Wellington reviewed the documents. His eyebrows rose higher with each page. This appears to be in order, he said finally. Completely legitimate. Bradford sputtered. But how? Why would you? Because of a debt. Webb turned to Rourke. 12 years ago. Kandahar province. A convoy hit an ambush. My son was in the third vehicle. Pinned down. Taking fire. His unit was about to be overrun. The crowd held its breath. A sergeant from another platoon disobeyed direct orders to stay clear. He and his K-9 partner pushed through enemy lines, drew fire away from the trapped convoy, gave my son's unit time to extract. Webb's voice cracked slightly. He steadied himself. That sergeant took shrapnel in his knee. His dog took a bullet in the shoulder. They both survived. My son survived. 16 men made it home that day because one man and his dog decided other lives mattered more than their own. He put his hand on Rourke's shoulder. That man never knew whose son he saved. Never asked for thanks. Never filed for the commendation he deserved. He just did his job and moved on. Rourke's throat tightened. Sir, I didn't. I know you didn't know. That's what makes it matter. Webb faced the crowd again. When I heard a veteran in my town was being harassed, being mocked, being sabotaged for trying to honor his fallen partner, I knew I had to help. The technology in this engine isn't stolen. It's a gift. A thank you that's 12 years overdue. The silence stretched. Then someone started clapping. One person, then 10, then the entire crowd. Applause rolled across the parking lot like thunder. People cheered. Some wiped tears from their eyes. The story spread instantly, phones transmitting it to the world beyond Brookridge. Bradford stood alone in the midst of the celebration, face gray, posture crumbling. Wellington stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I think we can officially declare this the most remarkable vehicle to ever grace the Kellier Auto Gala. Perhaps the most remarkable vehicle I've encountered in 40 years of judging." More applause, more cheers. Then Wellington continued. "I'm also informed that the HOA board will be reviewing certain complaints filed against Mr. Halden. Given what we've learned tonight about the character of the accuser and the accused, I suspect those complaints will be dismissed." He looked directly at Bradford. Sometimes a man's true worth can't be measured in property values or bank statements. Sometimes it's measured in loyalty, in sacrifice, in a willingness to stand up when everyone else looks away. Bradford opened his mouth to respond. Nothing came out. He turned and walked away, through the crowd, past the champagne tables, into the darkness beyond the string lights. No one stopped him. No one called after him. He simply disappeared. Rourke stood beside the Mustang, overwhelmed. Mara clutched his hand. Vernon and Colonel Webb flanked him like brothers in arms. Reporters materialized from the crowd. Questions flew from every direction. "Mr. Halden, how does it feel to win? Will you be entering other competitions? Can you tell us more about Alice?" He answered what he could, deferred what he couldn't. Through it all, his hand never left the Mustang's fender. At midnight, the gala finally wound down. Tents collapsed. Lights dimmed. The exotic cars loaded onto trailers and rolled away. Rourke and Mara climbed into the Mustang. Vernon and Colonel Webb followed in their trucks. As they pulled out of the lot, Rourke glanced in the rearview mirror. The community center shrank behind them, lights winking out one by one. Mara leaned against his shoulder, exhaustion finally catching up. "Daddy." "Yeah, baby." "We did it." He smiled. "Yeah, we did." The convoy of 3 vehicles rolled through quiet streets, past sleeping houses, under stars that looked exactly like the ones that had washed over a dog named Atlas halfway around the world. And somewhere in the wind, Rourke heard it again. That bark, that soft, familiar sound. "We made it, buddy," he whispered to the empty seat beside his daughter. "We made it home." The morning sun painted Brookridge in shades of gold and amber. Rourke stood in his driveway, coffee steaming in his hand, watching the neighborhood come alive. Sprinklers hissed. Garage doors hummed open. The Saturday rhythms of suburban life resumed as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The Mustang sat beside him, chrome gleaming, paint catching light like liquid fire. 3 days since the gala. 3 days since Bradford Kellier's world collapsed. The house across the street had a for sale sign in the yard now. Bradford had listed it Monday morning, packed his Mercedes Tuesday afternoon, and vanished without a forwarding address. Some said he moved to Florida. Others said Texas. Nobody seemed particularly interested in finding out. The HOA had dropped all complaints against Rourke. The fines were waived. The threatening letters stopped. 3 board members resigned in embarrassment, replaced by neighbors who understood that community meant more than property values. Mrs. Delphine brought over a congratulations cake the day after the gala. Mr. Hendricks shook Rourke's hand for a full minute without speaking. Deshawn asked if he could help with future projects, already dreaming of restoring his own car someday. The story had spread beyond Brookridge. Local news covered it first, then regional outlets, then national programs looking for feel-good content. A veteran foundation reached out with sponsorship offers. An engineering firm asked if Rourke would consult on military restoration projects. He said yes to some, no to others. Money mattered, but not as much as time with Mara. Colonel Webb had stayed in town for 2 days before returning to his own life. They had dinner together the night before he left, swapping stories about service and sacrifice over steaks Rourke couldn't afford, but insisted on buying anyway. "You're a good man, Halden," Webb said at the end of the evening. "Atlas knew what he was doing when he saved you. Sometimes I wonder if I deserved it. Nobody deserves sacrifice. That's what makes it sacred." Webb stood, extended his hand. "Take care of that girl. Take care of that car. And take care of yourself." They shook hands. Webb drove away. Rourke went home to Mara and the Mustang and the quiet peace he had finally earned. Now, standing in the morning light, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Contentment, not happiness. Happiness was a spike, a moment, a flash that faded. Contentment was deeper, steadier. The knowledge that you had done what needed doing and could finally rest. Mara appeared at the front door, still in pajamas, hair tangled from sleep. "Daddy, can we go for a drive?" He smiled. "Get dressed. 10 minutes." She disappeared inside. He heard her footsteps racing up the stairs, the thump of drawers opening and closing. Vernon's Chevy rolled up to the curb. The old engineer climbed out, coffee in hand, same as every morning for the past month. "How's she running?" Vernon nodded at the Mustang. "Smooth as silk." "Good." Vernon leaned against his truck, staring at the car with something like pride. "You know, I built that carburetor 30 years ago. Always figured it would end up in some collector's garage, gathering dust. Never thought it would actually matter to anyone." "It matters." "Yeah." Vernon smiled. "Yeah, it does." They stood in comfortable silence. The sun climbed higher. The neighborhood woke. Mara burst through the door, dressed in jeans and her favorite t-shirt, the one with the cartoon dog she had picked out herself last summer. "Ready." Rourke opened the passenger door for her. She climbed in, bouncing on a bench seat. "Where are we going?" "Anywhere you want." She considered this with the seriousness of an 8-year-old making a life decision. "The lake. The one Mom used to take me to." His heart clenched. He hadn't been to that lake since the divorce. Hadn't been able to face the memories. But today felt different. Today felt like a day for facing things. "The lake it is." He climbed behind the wheel. The engine started on the first turn, that deep rumble he would never tire of hearing. He backed out of the driveway, waved to Vernon, and pointed the Mustang toward the edge of town. The road opened before them, empty and winding, cutting through fields that stretched to the horizon. Wind poured through the open windows, warm and clean. Mara turned on the radio, found some station playing oldies, started singing along to songs she barely knew the words to. Rourke let her voice fill the car, let the music wash over him, let the miles disappear beneath humming tires. They reached the lake an hour later. A small beach, a wooden dock, trees pressing close to the water's edge. Mara ran ahead, kicking off her shoes, splashing into the shallows with laughter that echoed across the water. Rourke sat on the hood of the Mustang and watched her play. The metal was warm beneath him. The sun was bright overhead. Everything was exactly as it should be. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. The mockery, the sabotage, the nights when giving up seemed like the only reasonable choice. The friends who had appeared when he needed them most. The dog who had given everything so others could live. Atlas. He said the name out loud, quietly, to the wind and the water. "Thank you, buddy, for everything." Mara splashed toward the shore, waving for him to join her. He slid off the hood and walked toward his daughter, toward the future, toward whatever came next. Behind him, the Mustang gleamed in the sunlight. No longer junk, no longer grief welded to steel. Just a promise kept, a memory honored, a friend forever riding alongside. The lake sparkled. Mara laughed, and somewhere in the distance, carried on a breeze that smelled like summer and second chances, Rourke heard it one last time. A bark, soft, familiar, at peace. He smiled and kept walking. Some stories don't end. They just find better places to continue. A new family had moved into Bradford's old house that morning. Rourke had seen them unloading boxes, kids running across the lawn, parents directing movers with tired smiles. The father had paused when he saw the Mustang, stared a little too long, said nothing. Later that evening, as Rourke washed road dust from the chrome, he noticed the new neighbor watching from his porch. Arms crossed, head tilted, expression unreadable. Rourke straightened, met the man's gaze. The neighbor didn't wave, didn't smile, just watched. And Rourke, towel in hand, whispered to himself the same words he had spoken 100 times before. Some people never learn. But he wasn't worried anymore. He had Atlas. He had Mara. He had a community that finally understood what mattered. Whatever came next, he would face it the same way he had faced everything else. One bolt at a time, 1 mile at a time, 1 day at a time, until the road ran out or the engine stopped singing. Whichever came last. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another journey like this one. We share stories that inspire, that challenge, and that remind us what courage really looks like. Drop a comment below. Tell us what Atlas's story meant to you. Share your own moments of triumph over adversity. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you know someone fighting their own battle, someone who needs to remember that junk can become glory, share this story with them. Because sometimes the thing everyone writes off becomes the thing that changes everything. See you in the next one.